Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back into the studio. We are going to continue working on the portrait of this here Kronos 3/4 scale maquette, which we started about 2 weeks back for you and actually several months ago for me. I think this video was filmed right after the lockdown was lifted here in Italy in late May and I could go back to the studio again. So this episode will be a continuation of the setup that we did the last time we worked on this portrait. We did a lot of work last time and we got all the way to dealing properly, or fairly properly at least, with the widths of the portrait from the front. Remember that the way I sculpt a portrait and the way we teach it at the Florence Academy of Art is to begin with the profile from the side view. And we kind of make a pancake sculpture almost, a flat version of the face. From here, we establish heights and the depths of the various features of the portrait. The depths of the eyes, for example, or the depths of the back of the nose, back of the nostrils, or the back of the jaw, or any number of depths. As depths cannot properly be judged from the front view, and as a consequence, a portrait developed solely from the front view tends to look flat and lack the depth needed to create a convincing head. So we develop heights and widths from the side view before progressing to the front view to address the widths. You can check out the video from 2 weeks ago to learn more in depth about this earlier part of the process. Today we will take what we accomplished last episode and build upon that, making minor adjustments and layering on more complexity without sacrificing any of the good work, hopefully, that we did last time. This is a key element to the technique that we teach, the process that we teach, as it is all about establishing something and then holding on to it for dear life while developing more complexity on top of that without losing the foundation that we laid down first. I will be spending my time today rendering the surface, dealing with some transitions between the various forms of the face, making minor adjustments to planes, making minor improvements to the very delicate features like the lips and nose, which need a lot of attention. But at this scale, pretty much everything is quite delicate. And as you'll see, millimeters make a big difference. This maquette is not made simply for me to enjoy sculpting or for me to make the same sculpture twice. It's a design maquette made to solidify the design I intend to create in a much larger format, larger than life format. A smaller format like this allows me to work out a lot of the kinks and figure out and make improvements and adjustments to the design as needed instead of having to deal with doing so in a very, very large scale, where there will obviously be a lot more clay to shovel around if I were to make a mistake or would like to make a change somewhere. Usually, there ends up being some adjustments needed, even in the larger scale, even if I make a maquette, as nothing is really foolproof. But this maquette, or any maquette for that matter, is gonna get me pretty far. I mentioned the scale of the figure, which as you can see is pretty small, which makes the head even smaller, of course. The head is about the length of my thumb maybe, or maybe the length of my index finger, so pretty small. This scale is good for designing the body pretty accurately to what I want in my large scale version. But the portrait is a slightly different story. It's a bit too small for me to get it exactly the way that I want it. So the portrait on this maquette needs to be in the right place, in other words, in the right pose, pretty much exactly where I want it to be in the large scale so that I can work out the overall design. And right now it is in that position and I'm happy with it. But the details of the face, the level of finish, if you will, the expression, the likeness, all that can be left somewhat unattended to at this scale. However, I am committing quite a bit of time to making this portrait as good as I can simply for the joy of sculpting. While this piece was not made to be a finished piece on its own, I think it would be a shame to put so much work into something and then just throw it out into the clay bin. So I do intend to keep this piece, and of course I want it to look nice. though the portrait might not represent what the final portrait on the large-scale Kronos will end up being. Transitions between forms should almost always be a little bit softer than what you think. We all have a tendency to make things too sharp. At least that's a problem I have. It's a bit of a confidence thing, actually. Many beginners are afraid of losing all the juicy information that they've spent so much time finding. It's the selfish sculptor syndrome, if you will. But I'm not afraid of losing it. If I lose something, if I lose some information or some details, and I need it after all, I'll find it again. Therefore, there's nothing to really be afraid of, especially at this step, as everything is more or less in the right place, and as long as I respect that, I should be good. It's just clay, right? So a lot of work happening in this episode is integrating the various forms into one another, or putting the forms underneath the skin, if you will. This is done with a combination of rake tools and some wooden tools. But you don't need a lot of tools, and a lot of this work could be done by hand. For this portrait, you might perhaps notice that there is no model present. Now, usually I don't show my models in the video, so maybe you wouldn't notice, but now you know, there is no model present here. That's because the model I used for the body doesn't really have the portrait that I'm actually after making. And it's also very hard for a model to sit with their mouth open for a very, very long time. It hurts actually after a while, so I didn't want to do that to my model, or any model. While his portrait is very interesting and I've sculpted it several times, I'm after something else with this piece. So I went looking for reference, pictures on the internet essentially, and I found the perfect reference from the lead singer of one of my favorite bands, Strapping Young Lad. So what I did was I combed through live footage of them playing on stage, and I screenshot every time there was a decent angle of a screaming vocal. Then I picked a few images that I liked and used them as reference. And of course, the most important thing for me was to have a picture from the front, of course, and from a few different angles. But most important was to have an image of the profile so that I could sculpt a fairly accurate profile. There are certain things I liked and wanted to keep intact, like the shorter nose, for example. The shorter nose to me is a little bit more aggressive looking than a longer nose, which is more kind of stern and strict. But at the same time, there were things I felt were missing that I wanted to include, like a little bit more of a pronounced bump on his nose bridge. So the portrait is not really meant to be an accurate representation, but it's nice to have something to reference, I think. I find it a little easier to breathe life, some semblance of life at least, into a sculpture when I have some proper reference to reference. Exactly what emotion I'm after in the final piece, I'm not entirely sure of yet. I do think that perhaps something slightly more complex than what I was able to make here would be a good idea. Here, to me at least, the portrait seems to be pure rage, which I don't think is unfit for the sculpture that I'm making necessarily, but rage is a pretty monotone emotion. One of the inspirations for this project is Carpo's Ugolino, and the character of Ugolino himself is much more complex in his emotion than pure rage or pure hate. Kronos should be somewhat aware, I think, of the act of the horror that he is performing, and almost be a little shocked at himself, at what he has turned himself into or what he has become. I think it will be important that there is a sense of regret or a sense of sadness, as well as hate and anger, present in the final version in order for you, the viewer, to have the opportunity to feel a little bit connected to Kronos. At this moment, he is just kind of plain scary, I think at least, and it's going to be hard for most of us, for most people, to see themselves in him and connect at all. I think that's going to be pretty hard either way actually, but I want to make sure I leave that window open at least, even if it's just barely open. Every now and then when I work on a finicky area like a small portrait, I will take a break and I will work on something else for a few minutes, like the body for example. It's good to, every now and then, change pace so you don't get too bogged down or too laser focused working on simply details. It's good to step back and get a view of the overall, a view of the whole, every now and then. In order to work out the exact emotion, the exact expression that I'm after, I plan to make a larger, perhaps 3/4 life-size scale portrait. So another portrait essentially, which will be barely smaller than life-size, 3/4 scale. And this, I think, and hope, is where I can make the exact portrait that I plan to make on the over life-size version. Here I will have to include all the emotional content that I wish to eventually include in the final version. But to work all that out in this really small scale is a lot harder and perhaps not really necessary. And I want to do another maquette, a portrait maquette if you will, because where Kronos' head is very tough to get to. It's going to be a lot of work to be stepping up and down on a step ladder to be able to walk up to the portrait, climb up, sculpt, climb back down and step back. So it would be a good idea, I think, to have a little bit of a dry run before beginning the very serious work of making the over life-size portrait on the figure itself. The 3/4 scale is also going to be close enough in scale to the larger than life version that I will be able to work out things like hair texture versus skin texture, the exact design of the hair, down to the exact design of the eyes of Kronos as well. Which I plan to do something with that I haven't really attempted before, like a little bit of a different technique, let's call it, or a little bit of a different look. So we'll see how that goes. I will of course make videos, as always, detailing the entire process of that as well. At the end of the video here, you'll see me draw in the hairline with my drawing tool. Now, if I had a model in front of me, the design of the hair would have been included way earlier, but I don't have a model here. Kronos will be balding very badly as well, which means I need to be able to see some part of the skull through his raggedy thin hair. And I do think that it's easier in this scenario to establish the skull a little bit more exact than I perhaps normally would before adding hair on top. The idea being that this will give me the freedom to design the hair while letting the skull show through in a few select areas without having to worry sculpting the skull, because I've already sculpted the skull before I add the hair on top. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did and want to learn sculpture from me or just support the channel, check out my Patreon page. Next time we will work on this piece, we will talk about sculpting the hair a little bit more, as it's a major part of this character's design. And we will of course cover how I sculpt eyes in this small scale as well, so stay tuned for that. If you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button and the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. If you enjoyed the video, click the like button and share with your friends and family. It really helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.